Director of Client Partnerships here at Pacific Cascade Legal. And today I'm here with award-winning science writer Rachel Lehmann-Haupt to talk about the expanding concept of what is it to be a family and important considerations surrounding collaborative reproduction. Hey, Rachel, how are you doing today?
I'm great. It's great to see you. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited for this topic, especially to be talking to people with legal minds.
Well, I used to have a pretty good one. But let's before we even start in, it was just a fascinating subject, and I'm just really wondering if you could talk about yourself a little and how you ended up coming to write about this topic.
Well, I'm a journalist by training, and my first book looked at women's new choices. We have more economic power because we're more educated. Women are therefore putting their economic power ahead of their procreative power, having children older. And because Mother Nature has not really changed our biological clock in millions of years, we're still, running into, because of modern choices and changes, we are running into more fertility challenges and therefore more heavily relying on advanced reproductive technologies. And so that book was called In Her Own Sweet Time, Egg Freezing and the New Frontiers of Family. It also was a personal journey. I, was in that same boat and decided to freeze my eggs when I was 37 years old. And that happened because the guy I was with wasn't on the same page with me about having kids. I was ready, he wasn't. And that relationship ended, unfortunately. And I decided rather than, have what my friends call a land grab marriage, which is just to marry somebody for the sake of having kids, didn't seem right or fair. I think love develops naturally. And I didn't want to have my biological clock dictating my decisions around that. So I decided to put the cart before the horse and have a baby on my own as a single mom by choice because I had the economic power and family support to do so. And my son was born when I was 40 in 2012. And since then, I've become very interested in sort of expanding the spectrum of how reproductive technologies are changing the shape of family. In those years that my son was born, egg freezing was taken off the experimental list by the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. The increased rates of success for reproductive tech went up. The trends towards people having children older went up. Marriage was suddenly, LGBTQ plus marriage was suddenly made legal, which opened up a whole new opportunity for gay people to have families. And unfortunately, although I'm going to tell you later on that there is hope in the future for that biological reproduction among same sexes. Yes, that's a bomb drop early on, but it will keep people watching. Two men need a certain part, a gamete. Two women need a certain part, a sperm. And sometimes, people just end up having children on their own, like I did. And so I needed a certain part. So that choice to have to go outside of the traditional nuclear family for biological material, genetic materials, sort of has untethered the nuclear family and created new structures in which there are other new players in the family. And the questions I wanted to know were what the shapes of these families looked like and how they were operating and what the new language was, what the new legal structures were. And so I started reporting a new book that became this one, Reconceptions.
I love it. I love it. And that leads into my first question. You sort of started talking, nuclear family, the traditional nuclear family. That's changing, isn't it?
It is changing, yes. The traditional nuclear family, well, it's interesting when we say traditional nuclear family. It's always taken a sperm and an egg to make a baby. Right? So that hasn't changed in millions and millions of years. We evolved that way. But it used to be actually like in paleo times that the traditional nuclear family, which is sort of a man and a woman, 2 children, in sort of biblical sense. That wasn't always the case. Like in paleo times, there were people raised their kids in tribes. There's like collective, collaborative parenting was the thing. And it wasn't like 2 people got together and got married and had a baby. It was like people had sex and they had babies and the tribe raised them. And there was actually, some argue, more equality in those with men and women. I mean, in those times. And that eventually evolved into pairing marriages. And then that eventually evolved into, I think, agriculture really sort of created the need to grab land and therefore have land ownership and therefore, have it made more sense. And men tended to own the land and therefore needed wives to help them with it and children to help them with it. And so that kind of evolved into more of what the nuclear family looks like today, or has looked like. And to some extent, the nuclear family was also really helped, like made possible, like in the 1950s. I know I'm kind of jumping way ahead from agriculture age to industrial age, but it was really made possible after World War II with a lot of incentives from the government. And women sort of took over the home front and men kind of went out and hunted and gathered, and that evolved. But then, in the 1960s, that sort of started changing as women got more economic power. It's very interesting that the housewives of the 50s became the, feminists of the 60s. And that rebellion really had to do with taking ownership of our own sexuality, of our own lives. And, people started getting divorced and to take ownership of their own lives. People started having children in many other ways. At that time, still, there were always gay people, there were always single people, but, it was much more marginalized. And also, with all of that, relationships have now really become about love. Women don't need to get married to have social, financial support anymore, and neither do men. So, we now come together for love. And as we have all realized, modern love is quite complicated and varied.
Yeah, that is the truth. Collaborative reproduction. We talked a little before about this, and because this terms collaborative in the legal world is like collaborative divorce. And that's kind of where that kind of thing is working together to get divorced. So I love the concept that you're talking about here. And so I guess the elephant in the room question is, well, what is collaborative reproduction? And, how does it work?
It was actually coined by a lawyer named John Robertson. And it really was speaking to the opening up of the ability to have a family within gay families. And obviously the fact that they needed genetic parts from other people. So, 2 gay men would need an egg, and often it would be their friend, their lesbian friend. 2 gay women would, need a sperm donor, sometimes would be uncle donor. And it was very, it was a kind of a Wild West when gay life was more marginalized and not legal. So the collaborative reproduction part is, sort of where the legal structure started coming in to create protections for these kinds of families that had to use different parts. And I think, it's really important to make the distinction that to some extent, parenting has always been collective, but never before at this level or intensity has reproduction become collective.
And I'm imagining that kind of not driving or helping or pushing this forward is the fact that science has kind of entered this arena in ways that it wasn't entered for a long, long time. And, you made a comment once that mothers can do a lot of things to be a mother that maybe it wasn't before, and fathers, both gay and straight, can do a lot of different things to be fathers, and that whole how it's taken a lot of different folks and created, the parentalhood, the like you say, the nuclear family or non-nuclear family.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is that you can be a mother in many ways now, and you can be a father in many ways now. And sometimes you're a mother biologically. You provide an egg to somebody who becomes the social mother or the actual mother, but that needs to have a legal, setting. Sometimes you provide a sperm to father a baby. I mean, my son was conceived with a sperm donor. He fathered my son. That's technically his biological father, but he has no social involvement. You can be a father by, the guy that I'm going to be with could end up being an adoptive father of my son. You can be a mother by being a surrogate, carrying, gestational carrier, carrying a baby for somebody and then giving birth to it and handing it off to the mother. So there are a lot of new kinds of roles for mothering and fathering. And therefore the need for new legal structures around this.
Oh, yeah. I'm just thinking, it's interesting. Co-parenting is one of those also legal terms that, again, generally is used for post-divorce. We're now divorced, we're now not living together, so now we're not parenting, we're co-parenting. But you talk about how co-parenting, that's just not necessarily related to divorced or separated couples anymore, and the co-parents can be a whole lot of different people.
That is true. And it's become a gray area. I mean, it used to be traditionally co-parenting was you married and then you divorced and you came up with a custody agreement to co-parent, collaborative agreement and divorce. Now a lot of, there are cases where women are, what are they doing? God, there's so many nuanced cases. They are getting pregnant accidentally or accidentally on purpose. And then, making co-parenting agreements with the men that they get pregnant with. I mean, I think that there is a moral and legal question around that. Does the man have an obligation to be the father to a child that he did not choose to parent? It's obviously very nuanced about, birth control and who controls that. But if a woman chooses to have a baby, so, I mean, I know somebody who that happened to, and now she, her son has a legal father and they co-parent back and forth. It goes back and forth between, like a divorce, but they were never married and they were actually never even together. So there's that. I mean, and then, there are cases where, there was a famous case that I write about in my book about Jason Patric, the actor, and his girlfriend. They kind of had an on again, off again relationship. She, was older, so therefore froze embryos with his sperm to, potentially have a baby together. Then they broke up and she decided to implant the embryos with his sperm without his permission and have a baby. And then he went and, tried to get custody of her son, and she claimed she was a single mom by choice. So that he didn't want to have custody. So that was like created a whole legal battle around like what is a sperm donor? What's a sperm donor and what's a co-parent? I mean, one of the reasons why it's complicated. And one of the, and I, even when I was thinking about having my son, I did have a couple conversations with guys, friends that were like, should we have a kid together? And then just, raise them as friends, which is, very common in the gay community. It's happened for years and, years and years and years. But, and some people make it work well, but I kind of ended up deciding that maybe it wasn't the best choice and that the more legally safe choice was to go through a sperm bank and actually, have a clear delineation of that this guy that helped father my son was not the legal father.
Right.
But,
Right.
And I did that with the hope that maybe, I would meet and fall in love with somebody that, I don't know necessarily would have to like take on being a father or adopt my son potentially, but maybe would be a male presence in his life.
You talk a little bit about a couple times freezing eggs, freezing embryos, and that's been around for a while.
Yes.
And typically that tends to require in a lot of states an adoption, a termination of parental rights. I mean, there's things that have to come so that one is protected, that this is just my kid, not yours, and the other is protected that 10 years down the road, I'm not going to get a support order. So, I mean, those things happen. But you said now there's new technologies, and the technologies, I'd like to talk about those a little bit. You talk about burgeoning technologies in the near future, and then technologies that are maybe a little far away, but that are crazy. And they are so fascinating. So let's talk about the technologies that is intertwined, obviously, with this whole concept.
Yeah, and I think the one that's kind of most interestingly intertwined, there are two most interestingly intertwined with this new concept. The one, there's a new technology called IVG, which is that you can actually take any cell in the body, it was started with blood cells, and turn them into sex cells, which ostensibly, it hasn't happened yet, but could make two people of the same sex be able to convert one of their cells into the missing part, and have a baby together. Now, there's a lot of steps in the science to get there, and we're probably many, many years away from that. But there was actually just a story in Nature magazine, the journal Nature, that they did it with two male mice. So two male mice have now procreated children. So it is not like really sci-fi. It's just there's going to be a lot of steps that need to take. And obviously that's going to change the game 100% because they will each be legal biological parents. And I mean, it probably doesn't take divorce out of the picture, but at least, there's not going to be the gray areas of, friends or, donors. I mean, I think the legal structures since gay marriage has become legal is have changed a lot. I mean, it's very clear now what contracts around donor eggs and donor sperm, and particularly for gay men around surrogacy. I mean, it used to be often that their lesbian friend carried the baby or even had the baby for them, and that would all often become an issue because it was her biological child, but she was handing it off to the two dads. And now there's gestational carriers that can get paid to carry babies for gay men, and also single dads. There's a story in my book about a single dad that really wanted to have his own baby, and he got an egg donor and a surrogate and had it. And now he is with a woman who is adopted his baby, and she didn't have kids. So, I mean, all kinds of new families. So anyway, that new technology could potentially take all of that off the table. I mean, but that's probably 20 years away. But then again, who knew that we were going to be able to do IVF? I mean, whoever, in the 1940s, did we ever think that babies would be conceived in petri dishes? Yep. And I think, the other interesting technology is like Gattaca. I mean, artificial wombs. What if, we took the being a surrogate is hard, and they're pushed hard by the industry. And, I think, it's obviously there's a financial incentive. So, a lot of surrogates have a lot of babies to make money. I mean, I did a story for a new publication called Proto-Life Media called Portrait of a Professional Baby Maker, that looks really into the life of a surrogate, which is wonderful in many ways, but also, challenging, and there are health problems. So, right now there are artificial wombs being developed really more for the sake of carrying preterm babies, because there's been a huge rise in preterm pregnancies. Some people think it's because women are having children older. It's kind of unknown really what the real reason is, but so there are some scientists working on ways to transfer a preterm baby earlier and earlier into an artificial womb that would be sort of like the equivalent of an incubator, but more that emulates the uterine environment. And of course, that makes the feminist bioethicists spin out and think, well, hey, child carrying a child is labor, it's dangerous to some extent, and it takes women out of the workforce. And what if we outsourced pregnancy, period, to artificial wombs? And maybe there is a future. Maybe Gattaca is actually not too far away.
You talk about also one that I thought to me was really, really fascinating, was the potential for having 3 genetic parents.
Yeah.
And when I was reading that, I'm kind of going, well, now that is going to have to create some more laws, because now if there are 3 genetic parents, there are 3 parents who may have the right to decide how the baby is raised, how the kid is raised. If there's a divorce, what if one of them divorced and the other? What do you do with that? But talk about that a little. I just love that. I like that concept because it makes, you can spin a sperm. Let's say if you have 2 gay guys, and you can spin a sperm, and so that you don't necessarily know who it was, but it still is one or the other. But the idea of 3 parents is fascinating.
Well, and it's legal in England. It's not in the United States. It's been quite controversial in the United States, although there is a doctor working on it. So it's called a mitochondrial transplant, basically, where the mitochondria of an egg is transferred into the mitochondria of another egg, and then inseminated with a sperm. So technically, the baby has the genetics of all 3 parents. Now, the reason that this technology has been invented is a couple reasons. One is because there are mitochondrial diseases that get passed down through the mother, and it would therefore eradicate passing down the mitochondrial disease. And then to some extent also there, is the argument that maybe it could help infertility, because say you're 48 years old and you really want to have a baby, but your egg is, and your eggs are still not viable anymore, but you can still have eggs, and potentially you could borrow the egg mitochondria of a younger woman's eggs, implant it, and then have a biological child, even though it would carry the genetics of 3 parents. So that is, possible.
That's a whole generation of new law.
It's a whole generation of new law. And and of course, the sci-fi version, and I say this almost in a comic way, is now polyamory is a thing. Maybe does a polyamorous threesome want to have a child this way? It's kind of the Wild West, but you got to just put it out there.
Oh, wow. You talked earlier about gametes. I remember gametes very, very about that much from science class in high school. But talk about that. You mean artificial? I think you said artificial gametes.
Artificial gametes. Artificial gametes are artificial gametes. You mean actually creating artificial gametes?
That's what it sounded like. It's as any human body cell can create them both.
Oh, well, that I think goes back to the IVG technology. It's creating a gamete cell, a sex cell from another cell in the body. So technically, a blood cell could be converted into, and then in that case, it would be called an artificial gamete.
So all these things can happen now. Lots of different.
No. Artificial gametes can happen, but they
can't.
You're
right, not that one. Yeah.
They can't produce babies yet.
Yeah.
Human
more
babies.
Things can happen. Let me put it
Mouse
that way.
babies.
Yeah. And more ways that there can be families created, kids born, parents become parents. There's got to be some issues and challenges going on with all of that. What are some of those complexities and those issues that are following all of this sort of a new ways to have kids?
Yeah. Well, I think the complexity we talked about is the co-parenting issue. Is it the father or is it the sperm donor? Is the guy, if it's a co-parenting, is he a sperm donor or is he a father? I think that's a real gray area that is happening. I think that case that I mentioned, the Jason Patrick case, really caused sperm donor laws to change in California. It went all the way up to the California legislature. That's how serious that issue is from a legal perspective, like who's the dad and who's a sperm donor.
Yeah.
So I think that's a real gray area. And I think the other areas are, the industry in general is very, very, very poorly regulated. So because, there's an economic incentive for these fertility clinics to sell sperm and sell eggs. Women go in and they realize, I can get paid $50,000 to be a surrogate. I can be paid, a lot of money to donate my eggs. So they go through these multiple cycles to donate their eggs and kind of push their body to the max, and then, guys, it's a lot easier to donate sperm. But, one of the things that has happened is that there's an incentive to sell sperm. So, they will there, and it's changing, it's getting better now. But, there have been cases where, kids end up having hundreds of siblings because of lax policies around sperm donation. And, that's kind of nutty. I mean, I did a story for Newsweek years ago about a guy in Michigan who was a sperm donor, and he found out that he had 400 offspring.
Wasn't there a movie about that?
Well, yeah.
Not a real movie.
With Vince Vaughn, yeah. I mean, and what's so interesting is he was very self-conscious about it, and he ended up working with this guy named George Church at Harvard, and had his genome sequenced and put his genome out for public record, so all these kids could go back and understand their genetics. I mean, he realized, so that was like a big act as a father in a way.
Yeah. One of the ones that just sort of, being in a law firm.
Yeah.
I think about, and you talked a little bit about, is about co-parenting and not marrying at all. I mean, it maybe even not cohabitating, but still co-parenting. And without, I'm sure, hopefully, without the intervention of the court. But, in every state, what the courts say that if there is an issue, we don't care necessarily how much you guys agreed to do this, that, who would pay for this, that. We're going to get imagine that sort of co-parenting, don't plan to marry. So what do I do? Do we draw up a contract kind of like a parenting plan? I mean, I don't know.
I'm not a lawyer.
Oh.
But I think that would probably be wise.
Yeah, I mean, I
think it can get very complicated. And also, this is like the big sort of underlying messages of the book. It's like, think when you're making these decisions, they don't necessarily need to be the traditional decisions, but they need to be the decisions that are in the best interest of the child. And so I think if you're going to go, there are all these websites now where people can go on and find a co-parent to have a baby with. It's like online dating without the marriage dating part. It's like they date to have a kid together. One guy who runs a place called modafamily.com joked it that the name of his thing really should have been Date to Inseminate. I know. I mean, so that's wild, right? Like, so yeah, I would say that there needs to be some sort of institutionalization and legal structure, unless you're just, really good about that. Really, really, really solid in what your values are around that. But you never know, right?
Yeah.
You never know. You never know in a nuclear family either. You never know in marriage either.
Yeah, it all, like, you really tied everything together when you said best interest of the child, because that's really the parenting, not just legal, but probably emotional, spiritual, whatever job. I mean, that's always first.
The best interest of the child. It is 100% true. And I mean, it is interesting, I kind of made the decision to do this on my own because I was like, co-parenting sounds so complicated. So it could get complicated. I mean, The research has shown that kids of single parents, single moms by choice, are actually more psychologically sound than the many children of divorce. I mean, divorce is really hard on kids.
Divorce screws people up.
It really, really is. So, I mean, I've seen it firsthand with some of my son's friends. It's just, where they're like going back and forth between these houses with like multiple other kids, step kids, and dating parents, and it's complicated. So, I mean, it is out of control. And, to some extent, I'm not like trying to toot my own horn, but like, I'm kind of a traditionalist in a way. Like my son, I may be on my own, but my son comes home to one home every day after school. And, we sit down and we have dinner as a family every night together. It's kind of like the 1950s in a way.
Yep. No, I totally understand that. Wow, we blew through 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's a good topic. It's juicy.
Oh, it's a terrific topic. And before we go, though, I do want you to let people know who are listening how they can get a hold of you if they would like to talk to you about this.
Yeah, well, I have a website. It's rachellehmann-haupt.com or lehmann-haupt.com. And you can see both my books. The first book, In Her Own Sweet Time, Egg Freezing and the New Frontiers of Family. And this book, Reconceptions, Modern Relationships, Reproductive Science, and the Unfolding Future of Family. So they can reach me through the website. I follow me on Instagram at @r_Lehmann-Haupt. They also, I'm available. I love speaking, and I'm available for speaking, particularly, to law firms. I think it's a new area of family law and with many, many different interesting, nuances. And so, I'm putting myself out there as a speaker, doing seminars or, speaking to legal conferences or legal groups about these topics.
Well, that is really important because the law has to follow this technology. It's going to.
Yes, exactly. So please spread the word.
Yep. Oh, you bet. And thank you again, Rachel.
There's a speakers page on my website that talks about all the topics that I can speak on, including the concept of collaborative reproduction.
Oh, I will look at that.
Okay.
And again, thank you again, Rachel. Sitting down, you talked to us about, collaborative reproduction, which is very technical, and then not technical, and then widespread and complex, but you did it in a way that it's actually was kind of easy to understand. That's not easy to do.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that.
Oh yeah, it was. If I can understand it, anyone can.
Good.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you everyone else for joining us today. If anyone has further questions on today's topic, we can post it here and you can get connected with Rachel. And until next time, stay safe, stay happy.